What is up, New Journey Church? As you know, this Sunday we're going to be working through 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 22 together. And to help you guys have the best experience possible this Sunday, we've had you guys reading back through some Old Testament events that are referenced in that passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Yesterday you read from Psalm chapter 78, verses 12 through 43, which gave you sort of a big picture snapshot of the people of Israel's journey from Egyptian slavery all the way to the Promised Land. Today you read from Exodus chapter 16 and a few verses there in the beginning of Exodus chapter 17 where God provides manna and He provides water from a rock. So what I wanted to do is maybe just help you get the most out of your reading by maybe just giving you a couple of quick observations about those passages. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of set us up and give you some context from really kind of the book of Exodus overall so that you can really kind of understand the totality and the ridiculousness of what's going on, especially in Exodus chapter 16 and 17. So the first thing we need to kind of note is that when these passages occur, the people of Israel have just been supernaturally, miraculously rescued from Egyptian slavery by the hand of God. So it's important to know these people were not just rescued, they were miraculously rescued by the hand of God. They didn't scheme up the perfect plan to overthrow Pharaoh. They didn't create some sort of clever hashtag and then do a whole bunch of tweets that everybody read and decided to get involved and set them free. Nobody pulled their smartphone out and filmed one of their fellow slaves being beaten by an Egyptian oppressor, and then it goes viral, which launches some worldwide movement to see them set free. It's very important that we understand as we read about these people's journey that they were underneath the thumb of their Egyptian oppressors and captors, and no one in the world cared. But God did. God cared. These were His people. These were the ancestors of Abraham, a man whom God had made a promise to, that one day He would come and He would rescue these people out of slavery in Egypt, and He would walk with them, escort them, if you will, all the way into a land that He promised them, a land where they would be free and feel joy and never again have to worry about being oppressed or possessed by any of their enemies, as long as they would cherish and worship and love God with their all. And so God intervenes. He steps in and becomes their hero and performs 10 signs. If you grew up in the church, we've come to call them plagues. And these were supernatural events, the likes of which the world has never seen before and has never seen since. And so God steps in and begins to perform these signs, and He does it in such a way. These signs, these plagues are so big, so outlandish, that God is leaving no doubt. He is not being ambiguous at all about who it is that is performing these signs and seeking to deliver these people. So the Egyptians need to see. This is part of why God acts in such an outlandish and over-the-top way. It is because the Egyptians need to see the power of God and feel fear and awe as they see the power of the God of the Israelites, because if they don't, they'll never set these people free. But the people of Israel need to see the bigness and the power of God as well, because after He rescues them, there's going to be a journey through the desert to get to the Promised Land. And these people are going to have to trust God that He is not only able and capable and powerful enough to intervene on their behalf, but that He is willing. And if God doesn't do those things, the people of Israel, they're not going to survive this journey through the desert. So God needs to convince them, hey, I am able, I am willing, I am powerful enough to intervene on your behalf. And so after these 10 supernatural acts, the Egyptians, they do let the people of Israel go. They pack up their 4-door burro sedans and their 2-hump camel minivans, take the kids, and they head out. And almost immediately after they leave Israel, the land of Egypt, Pharaoh immediately regrets his decision. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's regret, but God works in Pharaoh's heart. It says He hardens his heart because he's determined to get glory over Pharaoh, and he leads Pharaoh to chase after and storm after the people of Israel. So he gathers the army, they chariot up, and they take off after these people. But God has not brought these people this far just to, watch them be slaughtered and to watch a bloodbath at the hand of the Egyptian military and warriors. So he parts the waters of the Red Sea, and the Israelites walk through on dry land. And as soon as Pharaoh and his army sort of get the courage to jump in, they jump into the waters and they take off after the people of Israel, and God has the waters of the Red Sea collapse back over the top of Pharaoh and the Egyptian warriors, drowning them in the sea, really killing not just Pharaoh, but the Egyptian version of the Green Berets. And so in Exodus chapter 15, as we kind of get nearer to our text, the people of Israel are on the other side of the Red Sea. They're watching the dead body of Egyptian soldiers and their former captors wash up on the shore and float off into the horizon. And like this crazy thing happens, like somebody grabs a tambourine, starts beating it up against their leg, like the people start singing and dancing, and Moses breaks out in this sort of freestyle song. This is sort of in my mind, I think about this being like maybe the first ever freestyle rap battle contest, right? Where there's a beat going on and Moses just starts dropping some really dope lines about the bigness and the vastness and the power of God, and how he just punked out and like put in their place the most powerful man on earth and the most powerful military at that time on the planet. And so like I'm having this moment where I'm having this like picture of Aaron, Moses' brother, as like his hype man, like beatboxing and telling Moses to get in there and drop some funky lyrics or something like that. Sorry, I get distracted. This is sort of the context, though. This is what's important, and the reason why I tell you all that is so that you understand the context of what you're reading in Exodus chapter 16 and the first couple of verses of Exodus 17, where we find these people who were just like literally 2 seconds ago doing the whip and the nay-nay to songs about the bigness and the goodness and the power of God, turning now and grumbling against God, and all because their tum-tums are now empty and growling. And they start making these crazy accusations about God, and they claim that God has led them into the desert, just like he set them free and take them out of Egypt because he wanted to kill them himself and not leave the job up to their former Egyptian captors, which would be the strangest plot twist in history if that were in fact true. And so we're left with this question: how could these people who have so clearly seen the mighty hand of God as he rescued them so quickly be able to doubt that he was both able and willing to continue to take care of them and meet their needs? And it's really easy to beat up on the Israelites and to call them idiots, but really the truth is we're not that different from them. I know on occasion in my own life I have followed after God into some situation, and as soon as it maybe didn't go the way I expected, or maybe it gets the tiniest bit hard, I start to doubt God, and I wonder if he was just tricking me into doing something that he knew I would fail at, so he could sort of kick the recliner back in heaven and just laugh at and get kicks at watching me stumble and fall and fail. And it's really hard for us, it's really easy for us to forget that they're having to follow after a God that they've really not known very well, and that following after Christ is not always easy. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes following after Jesus is a breeze, like when you're walking out of slavery in Egypt. But there's a lot of times when it's much harder, like walking through the desert to a destination that you're really not sure where it is or how you're going to get there. As Charles Spurgeon, one of my favorite former pastors, said once, that sometimes we can't see God's hands, but we can always trust his heart. And so the Israelites, when we get into Exodus chapter 16, they launch a mini rebellion against God. And what's important for us is how God responds. He responds to their rebellion with grace. He meets their needs. And they don't deserve it. He simply chooses to provide for them anyway. The manna, the bread from heaven, was for God's people a reminder to them of his love for them and his determination to do good to them. And ultimately, it points us forward to his glorious salvation. We don't do anything to earn it. God simply chooses to grant it. And just like the manna was received by the people of Israel completely apart from their labor, our salvation through Christ is received by us completely apart from our labor. We simply have to trust God for it. Just like the Israelites had to trust that the next day when they woke up, God would provide them manna again. We simply have to trust God that the things he's promised to do for us in Christ, He will in fact do. This whole story is a foreshadowing where God provides salvation for His children fully, freely, finally, and forever in Christ. For those who trust Christ, just like the manna was fresh every day for the Israelites, His grace is fresh for us every morning. And then when we get into Exodus chapter 17, we see Israel facing a very similar interaction, a very similar test where they get to a place and they run out of water. And again, given every single opportunity based upon who God has been to them, given every single opportunity to respond in faith, rather they choose to operate and respond in fear. And God responds once again, not with wrath, but with mercy. He has Moses strike a rock with his staff, and water flows out of that rock, saving the life of the people. And this again points us forward to Jesus, where God chooses in the desert to strike a rock and not His people. God once again, later on, as we kind of get into the New Testament, God will choose to strike the rock of ages, Jesus Christ, rather than to strike His people as He strikes Christ on the cross. And when Jesus is struck by God for our sin, living water flows, and God's people still drink that water and find life in it. And the reason ultimately that I think we need to just be honest about this, that the reason ultimately that we grumble against God is that we want Jesus to save us. Like we want to go to heaven when we die. We just don't want to follow Him. Right? We want heaven because that's easy. Just like the Israelites, they just wanted to leave Egypt and instantaneously be in the promised land. We want God to rescue us, save us, and then we just instantaneously want it to be as easy as possible. I firmly believe this, that the reason so many Christians are disappointed and frustrated or bored is because we've become more about God's gifts rather than God's glory through our suffering. And Jesus said to follow Him. And to follow Him means to die to ourselves. And to deny ourselves. It means to give up what we think we want and what we desire, because we have discovered and believe that what we will find on the road as we travel with Christ is better than what we could have come up with for ourselves. And so my prayer as we wrap all of this up is that this helps your walk with Christ. And maybe it brings just a little more color to the text that we have been reading together as a church family. And my hope and my prayer for you is that maybe you'll do some honest, serious evaluation about kind of where you're at in your relationship with Christ. And if you've kind of gotten to this point where you're not very grateful and you're doing a lot more grumbling, then maybe you would kind of just be honest about what your expectations of God are, what it is you think that God owes you. And then maybe you've kind of drifted into some self-righteousness and gotten to this point where you can't believe God would make it this hard on you to follow Him when you think you've done so much for Him. My prayer for you is that once again you would find that God's provision, His grace for you is new every single morning, and that you don't deserve it. And yet in spite of that, the King of Glory has chosen to grant it to you, but simply because He is good and not because you are good. Blessings.